Welcome to the Flight Levels. 15 years ago this week, I saw a news headline I'll never forget. It was about the fatal crash of November 883 Foxtrot Tango in Palm Beach, Florida. A crash that took the life of a classmate and a friend from Florida Institute of Technology. Today, we're not just discussing the events, we're using this tragedy as a critical lesson in aviation safety. We're going over the few minutes leading up to the crash and the key takeaways about checklists and emergency procedures that I make a point of sharing with every one of my students. Let's get to it. Florida Institute of Technology, where I earned most of my pilot certificates, operates under FAR Part 141. Students there often fly multi-engine aircraft like the Piper Seminole on international flights, frequently taking friends to the Bahamas, which is exactly what the pilot of November 883 Foxtrot Tango was doing. When returning from the Bahamas, the pilot flew to Palm Beach, Florida to clear customs and to refuel. When taking off from Palm Beach en route back to Melbourne, the pilot experienced an engine failure of the left engine, lost control of the aircraft, and crashed. All 4 occupants received fatal injuries. The NTSB investigation revealed a stark, tragic truth. The left engine's fuel selector valve was in the off position. Moving forward, I want to disclose that I am a commercial multi-engine pilot and single-engine flight instructor. While I do not hold a multi-engine instructor certificate, the key lessons here are foundational to all flight training. Unfortunately, the engine failure occurred in the seconds after liftoff. For multi-engine flying, this is the most unforgiving phase of flight. Why? Because the aircraft is both slow and at an extremely low altitude. You have minimal time and minimal engine energy to recover. The crash happened as a result of 2 main errors. The failure to place the left fuel selector valve in the on position prior to takeoff, and the failure to control the aircraft following the engine failure. Let's start with the fuel selector valve. On the Piper Seminole, the fuel selector valve for each engine is located on the floor between the front seats. The switch slides forward and aft between 3 positions. The forward position is on, the middle position off, and the aft position is crossfeed. During normal operations, each selector is in the on position, which provides fuel from the left fuel tank to the left engine and fuel from the right tank to the right engine. In the event there was an engine failure during cruise flight, the pilot would have access to fuel remaining in both tanks to run the operating engine if necessary to continue flight to a destination. The crossfeed feature can also be used in the event of an uneven fuel balance. If we take a look at the normal checklists used at FIT Aviation, the before taxi checklist includes check crossfeed left, left on, check crossfeed right, right on. This is done to ensure the functionality of cross-feeding fuel is functional. Placing each selector to the on position here is the first opportunity to verify both fuel selectors are in the on position. Next, the ground check, or what some call the engine run-up checklist, also has a place to verify the fuel selector valves are in the on position. Then there is a takeoff briefing checklist, which includes verifying the fuel selector valves are on. Lastly, the runway entry checklist includes one last verify on for the fuel selectors. This is a total of 4 opportunities to verify the fuel selectors are on. This oversight of the left fuel selector valve is no different than all of the pilots who inadvertently leave their gear levers in the up position while landing. Checklists are only useful if pilots actually validate each item. While flight instructing, it is always a challenge to get students to question items on the checklist. Just pointing to an item in the cockpit and saying the name of it is not the same as questioning if it is in the desired position. For example, an observation I've seen over and over again is students performing a magneto check. They move the key to the proper left, right in both positions. But when I ask them how much the RPM dropped, their response is sometimes, I don't know, which is a problem. But sometimes the student will reply with an accurate response of 125 RPM, to which I follow up, is that acceptable? The blank stares in response are a problem. Tell me in the comments what an acceptable drop in RPM is on the plane you fly. Checklists are not just for going through the motions. Checklists are for verifying an item is within certain specifications. If you don't know the specifications, how can you know this item is acceptable? My speculation is the pilot in the left seat of November 883 Foxtrot Tango performed the crossfeed check, inadvertently failed to move the left fuel selector valve all the way forward to the on position, and did not actually verify its position on the 3 other steps of the checklist. I'm also speculating the flight instructor in the right seat, having flown with this pilot on several legs prior to that day, trusted the pilot to properly follow the checklist and did not validate the position herself. Now the plane is accelerating down the runway for takeoff. At the proper speed of 75 knots indicated airspeed, the pilot pulls back on the yoke to rotate and take off. As the plane climbs through 50 feet, the left engine begins to fail. The plane begins to roll left. The indicated airspeed remains precariously low at 75 knots. At this point, it's worth bringing up a discrepancy I found between the checklist used by FAT Aviation and the POH written by Piper Aircraft. The emergency checklist in the POH has a section titled Engine Failure During Takeoff, Speed Below 75 Knots Indicated Airspeed, or Gear Down, versus the FIT Aviation Emergency Checklist similar section is titled Engine Failure During Takeoff Below 88 Knots Indicated Airspeed, or Gear Down. The reason for discriminating between a particular speed and the gear being down is the energy state of the airplane. If the plane is either too slow or has too much drag, such as the gear being down, the best outcome is likely to result from closing both throttles and landing straight ahead. This is true because the dangers of adverse thrust are eliminated if neither engine is producing thrust. There are few aircraft as difficult to control as a slow multi-engine aircraft with a failed engine that has yet to be feathered. Although the pilot would be accepting a forced landing potentially beyond the end of a runway, the landing would likely be under control and, most importantly, survivable. On the other hand, if you have enough airspeed and you have the gear and flaps retracted, the pilot is much more likely to successfully control the airplane, feather the propeller on the failed engine, and safely perform a precautionary landing on the good engine. Piper's version, with the decision speed being 75 knots indicated airspeed, was likely created with a test pilot who knew a simulated engine failure was about to occur. Therefore, I have no doubt the aircraft is capable of being safely controlled during an engine failure at 75 knots. However, the reality is that most pilots are not test pilots. They are also not ready to spring into action the moment an engine failure happens. I do not know why FIT Aviation chose to change their emergency checklist to be at 88 knots instead of 75 knots. But I feel confident they did this because they wanted a more conservative approach. I don't think it's a coincidence they chose 88, which is also VYSE, or best rate of climb with single engine, for the Piper Seminole. If a pilot with FIT Aviation would have an engine failure below 88 knots, they should close both throttles, push the yoke forward to maintain airspeed, and land straight ahead. This decision speed should be part of the pre-takeoff briefing before every takeoff. If we take a look at the FIT Aviation takeoff briefing, we have climb out speeds, brief intentions if engine fails, and emergency pilot and command brief. Based on the experience I had training in Seminoles at FIT Aviation, I suspect this brief did happen. Unfortunately, it does not appear it was executed. The time between the left engine failure and impact with the ground was about 35 seconds. I suspect it was very chaotic and terrifying. There would have been a few seconds to recognize what was happening. The flight instructor made a call to the tower to report the engine failure, and they needed to return to the runway. My speculation is she made this transmission while assuming the pilot would appropriately follow the procedure they had just briefed in the takeoff briefing. To all of the flight instructors watching, please do not waste time talking to ATC. Controllers cannot fly your airplane. Announce to your student that you have the flight controls and fly the airplane. Based on the fact the left engine was not feathered and the landing gear remained down, I speculate that whoever was on the flight controls was just trying to keep control of the airplane and had not gotten to any procedure memorized or on a checklist. With their altitude so low and their indicated airspeed below 88 knots, the instructor should have taken control, pulled back the throttles to idle, and landed straight ahead. First, it was a failure of procedure. The pilot had 4 chances to verify that the fuel selector was in the on position. 4 lines on a checklist that were checked, but perhaps not validated. We, as pilots and instructors, must stop simply pointing and saying the name of an item. The checklist is not a script for an action. It is a verification tool to ensure an item is in the correct position and within specified limits. Just as my students sometimes miss the acceptable RPM drop on a magneto check, the pilot here likely missed the physical position of a critical switch. This oversight is something every pilot must actively fight against. Second, it was a failure of immediate action. The NTSB report and the timeline showed the most conservative, life-saving action was not taken. In those 35 terrifying seconds, the instructor lost precious time contacting the tower instead of immediately taking control, pulling the power, and executing the pre-briefed emergency plan. Flight instructors, you are the last defense. In a low-altitude, low-speed engine failure, your first and only call should be, "My controls." Communication with the ATC can wait. Controlling the airplane cannot. We talk about accidents like November 883 Foxtrot Tango not to assign blame, but to engrave the lessons into our own operating procedures. For me, this crash is a constant personal reminder. My classmate, the flight instructor, is gone, but the lessons from that day live on in every pre-takeoff briefing I give. Remember, validate your checklist, don't just read it. When you brief an emergency, be ready to execute it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss my next video. Be sure to check out flight-levels.com. And remember, don't just fly, climb into the flight levels. If you enjoyed this video, click here to see my video about IFR flight plan reroutes. You're gonna love it.